Picture a quiet, dew-soaked Tuesday morning just outside your back window. The morning sun cuts across the lawn, igniting the frost on the grass into tiny sparks of light. You step up to the glass with a small scoop of mixed seeds in your hand, walking out onto the patio to scatter them across the wooden feeder. To you, this is a sanctuary ritual, a peaceful act of kindness, bridging the gap between our world and the wild. As you step back, the first arrival drops from the canopy above. A flash of feathers lands with a soft thump on the cedar wood, head bobbing, beak snapping up a seed in a blur of motion. You smile, sip your coffee, and watch the peaceful scene unfold. What you cannot hear, though, is the high-frequency click of an invisible switch being flipped in the trees above your house. Within minutes, that single visitor multiplies. Shadows dart across the grass with terrifying speed. By tomorrow, that simple morning gesture won't just be an act of charity anymore. It will have triggered a profound, irreversible shift in the local ecosystem right outside your window, turning your quiet backyard into a high-stakes arena of hidden avian politics, ecological dependence, and biological rewiring. Most people believe that feeding backyard birds is a purely beneficial act. We assume tossing out sunflower seeds or suet blocks is like leaving a basket of fruit on a neighbor's porch, a net positive with zero downside. We think we're rescuing starving songbirds from the harsh realities of winter or urban sprawl, bringing a touch of the wild closer to home. Yet, here's what most people don't realize. Nature doesn't operate on charity. It operates on equilibrium. When you introduce a localized, artificial, and limitless calorie fountain into an environment, you aren't just feeding birds, you're rewriting the evolutionary rules of survival. In a pristine natural habitat, a bird's day is an exhausting, miles-long calculation of energy expenditure versus caloric reward. They have to forage across vast territories, dodge predators, navigate weather shifts, and compete in a balanced hierarchy. But when you anchor a high-density food source to a wooden post 6 feet from your kitchen glass, you instantly collapse that vast landscape into a tiny, hyper-competitive zone. Wait, what happens to an animal species when the fundamental struggle for existence is suddenly replaced by an infinite human-provided buffet? The answer is a silent, complex restructuring of the natural world, one that plays out in absolute secrecy, right above your lawn, while you're inside washing your breakfast dishes. This matters. Right now, millions of homeowners are participating in this quiet experiment, completely unaware of the ripples they're sending through the local food web. The most unsettling part of all this? It's the total illusion of harmony. When you look out your window and see 20 different birds sharing a feeder, your brain just automatically interprets it as a nice little community. But beneath that picturesque surface, honestly, a dark Darwinian pressure cooker is boiling over. You're inadvertently dismantling natural territories, supercharging the spread of invisible pathogens, and distorting predator-prey dynamics in ways that science is only now beginning to fully document. By the end of this journey, you will never look at a backyard bird feeder the same way again. You'll understand the hidden architecture of wildlife behavior, the ecological cost of artificial abundance, and why your well-meaning morning routine carries a heavy, invisible price tag. If you want to uncover the hidden systems governing the natural world right outside your door and discover the ecological truths the mainstream doesn't really talk about, make sure to subscribe. We dive deep into the fascinating, complex realities of animal behavior. Now, let's step outside and uncover exactly what happened during that month-long backyard experiment. On day one of the experiment, the rules of the local ecosystem seemed pretty straightforward. A handful of common resident birds, house finches, chickadees, and the occasional mourning dove claimed the feeder. Their movements were cautious, erratic, and deeply attuned to everything around them. They would land, grab a single seed, and immediately dart back into the dense cover of the neighbor's juniper hedge just to crack it open in safety. This is the standard rhythm of wild survival. Cover equals safety. Exposure equals death. But by day 7, something fundamentally shifted in the geometry of the yard. The birds just stopped flying back to the juniper hedge. Honestly, why waste precious metabolic energy commuting back and forth to cover when the calorie source right in front of them is practically inexhaustible? Instead, they started lingering right there on the feeder tray, eating side by side with species that, under normal conditions, would never tolerate being that close to each other. The physical space around the feeder turned into this crazy avian highway. The air grew thick with the dry, papery rustle of wings beating against the crisp morning air, punctuated by sharp, territorial warning clicks. Then a dominant scrub jay arrives, and the smaller chickadees vanish, not because they flew away, but because they got pushed out to the outer edges of this invisible sphere of influence surrounding your feeder. You watch all this from your kitchen window and just think it's normal bird behavior. But here's what most people don't realize. You've inadvertently created an artificial resource monopoly. In ecology, when you concentrate food, you concentrate power. The birds that figured out your feeding schedule first established a literal territorial mafia, dictating who gets to eat, who waits, and who starves. By day 14, the psychological dependency started showing up right in their daily routines. Wild animals are naturally nomadic, constantly shifting their foraging grounds day by day to prevent overexploiting local seed banks and insect populations. But our test subjects? They completely anchored themselves. They just stopped exploring the woods nearby. Their home ranges, which really should span across acres, shrank right down to a tiny radius of just a few hundred feet, centered completely on your patio. They weren't wild foragers anymore. They were basically residents of an artificial commune. Honestly, the biological cost of all that easy food is pretty steep. When a bird relies entirely on these high-fat, high-carb seeds handed out by humans, its internal system just adapts to the surplus. Fat stores build up fast. Their liver and digestive tracts adjust to handle a diet that's way richer and a lot less diverse than anything they'd ever find scouring a natural forest floor. And here's what's even more alarming. The whole social structure of the flock just fractured. In a natural flock, birds actually cooperate. They work together to spot predators and share what's going on around them. But put out an infinite feeder, and all that cooperation turns into aggressive competition. We caught high-definition footage of constant wing slapping, beak jabbing, territorial fights going on from dawn until dusk. These birds were totally stressed out, hyper-vigilant, and completely consumed by the very resource that was supposed to help them. By day 21, the invisible boundaries of this backyard ecosystem started bleeding outward, and it brought in things you definitely didn't invite to breakfast. A dense bunch of small, distracted songbirds acting as easy targets doesn't stay unnoticed by the apex predators on the edge of the suburbs. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, the frantic, high-pitched alarm calls of a dozen goldfinches suddenly pierce the air. It's that sharp, urgent sound that instantly forces your head up from your desk. A shadow plummeted straight down from the upper branches of the oak tree. A Cooper's hawk, moving with this lethal, calculated precision, clipped the edge of the feeder tray. It missed a startled finch by literal fractions of an inch before banking hard into the fence line. This is the hidden shadow of backyard feeding right here. You aren't just feeding songbirds, you are creating a localized predator magnet. By concentrating all these prey animals into one predictable stationary spot, you've turned your patio into an open-air hunting preserve. That hawk didn't just happen to fly through your yard by chance, it learned the schedule. It mapped out the vulnerability of the entire artificial ecosystem you built. And honestly, what was happening at a microscopic level right on the wooden surface of the feeder itself was even worse. By week 3, hundreds of birds had landed, dropped waste, sneezed, and rubbed their bills across the exact same square inches of cedarwood. In nature, birds spread out over miles, keeping parasite loads low. But your feeder? It basically became an avian subway station during rush hour. Trichomoniasis, this microscopic parasite that attacks the upper digestive tracts of finches and doves, started leaving its silent signature. A single infected bird visits your patio, dropping microscopic pathogens right onto the seed hulls. The next bird arrives, picks up the contaminated seed, and carries that sentence back to its nest. And you walk out there to fill the feeder with a warm heart, completely blind to the fact that you're running an unintended vector station. By day 28, the experiment reached its psychological climax. The birds stopped viewing the yard as nature. They saw it as a human-controlled vending machine. They lost their fear of human proximity. They'd just sit on the patio chairs waiting for the morning door handle to turn. All their ancient survival instincts, the wariness, the scouting flights, the nomadic drive had just been traded away for the guaranteed calorie hit of a sunflower seed. And then, abruptly, it ended. On day 29, the feeder was left empty. What happened next was just a chilling window into how fragile these artificial ecosystems really are. Within hours, the morning silence of the yard was heavy and surreal. By noon, a frantic cloud of dozens of birds descended upon the empty tray, scratching at the bare wood, pecking at imaginary dust, refusing to leave. They didn't scatter to find natural food, they just waited. They lingered in the freezing air, wasting precious metabolic energy staring at an empty plastic port that had failed them for the first time in a month. They had forgotten how to look. They had forgotten how to look. They had traded their wildness for our convenience. And as you stand at your kitchen window watching those frantic shadows linger over the empty patio, the realization hits you. Like a physical blow, we think our interactions with nature are benign because our intentions are pure. We want to help. We want to connect. We want to see bright wings flashing against the dull gray of an urban morning. But honestly, nature doesn't care about our intentions. It only responds to our interventions. The feeder in your yard isn't a bridge to the wild. It's an artificial fulcrum, tilting the balance of survival, rewriting the instincts of the local fauna, and binding them to a human schedule they can't possibly comprehend. When you pour seed onto that tray, you aren't just feeding a bird. You're pulling a thread in a vast, ancient, ecological tapestry and just hoping the whole thing doesn't unravel. So, step back up to your back window tomorrow morning. Look at the trees, the lawn, the quiet spaces between the houses. Realize that every human action leaves an invisible footprint. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do for the wild world is simply to step back, let them forage on their own terms, and leave nature to its own devices. Have you ever noticed how wildlife around your home changes when you alter your outdoor habits? And what did it teach you about the balance just outside your glass? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below, and let's keep uncovering these hidden realities.